Oh,
of the
I'm sorry,
country.
I missed that one. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Of course, the other districts, there's lower incomes, and not all the statistics are in. But of the areas that are not affected by the conflict, that's where we try to focus. We also have 4 pillars in this development assistance framework, and one of them is specifically on gender. And people are surprised that we have that in Sri Lanka because women are actually more educated than men. University enrollments are quite high. If you look at issues of reproductive health, Sri
Yes.
Lanka is actually a model for many countries around the world, and
That's right.
how few women actually die during childbirth, how few children die in their first few years. It's amongst the best in Asia. But if you look at women's participation in terms of how many women are managers, how many are in government, and if you also look at, it just was Women's Day 2 days ago, you look at issues of gender-based violence, it's actually fairly serious in the country as well. So that's why we felt that it was important to focus on issues of equality with respect to gender as well.
Okay, now I want to go back
Yeah.
to where you left off with the human rights and displaced and all those issues. But I want to now bring you to the post-conflict scenario. You said you didn't work in the conflict areas earlier. Now there is the whole province, the eastern province, that is poor and regionally, of course, not doing as well as the rest. How do you now proceed? Perhaps we can go back. The Chief Minister Chandrakantan was elected almost a year ago, right? And then the UN agencies, the government, various other donors went in with the Eastern Development Program and so on. Perhaps you can start off with what you saw the immediate challenges were when you went in almost a year ago, and how you've seen those being taken care of, and what challenges exist now.
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge was the area had been through tremendous fighting immediately before, and there were 200,000 people who'd been displaced. People who hadn't been displaced also had had their lives uprooted. So how do you get these people back to their homes? How do you get some sense of normalcy? How do you rebuild the government infrastructure? How do you rebuild physical capital? But perhaps most importantly, and where we have an advantage, how do you rebuild what we call social capital? Social capital is how people interact with each other, how the community structures are. So we've been involved in all that. I mean, we were involved with humanitarian assistance to the people who were displaced, which is very important, because if that humanitarian assistance wasn't provided properly, people's welfare would have got down, they would have become unhealthy, they would have become more unhappy, and it would have been very hard for them to move back. We assisted a lot, and I think fairly successfully, working together with the local government, with the national government, on getting people to return who'd been displaced. And I think all but 6,000 people have now returned in the East. And then we've been working on trying to help those people when they return get down to some sort of regular life. Some things are very basic. We gave them 6 months of food ration initially. But then we moved on to other things, helping with rebuilding their schools, helping get the health system working, getting the water wells working, and now working on livelihoods. I mean, we did a big effort last year on trying to provide seeds and basic agricultural tools so people could start cultivating land, which in many cases had been fallow for at least 6 months, but sometimes for 2 years, and sometimes even longer than that. And I think it's one of the reasons why there's supposed to be a fairly good crop in Sri Lanka this year. The East is actually coming up with a lot of rice and other things like millet for the first time.
Right. Now, you said you were able to resettle all but 6,000 or so of what you said, about 200,000 internally displaced persons. What were the lessons you learned? I'm asking you that question because there's a whole issue about internally displaced people now from the other areas, the northern province, right? So what were the challenges that you faced in resettlement?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most difficult challenges is that the people are often going back to areas where, because they've been fighting, the infrastructure had been destroyed. And I'm not talking about big, complicated infrastructure. I'm talking about irrigation canals or schools being taken apart, roads being bad quality. So that was one challenge. Another challenge, I think, well, dealt to a certain extent with land ownership. because people were coming back. In areas that had been held by the LTT, it always wasn't quite clear whether people had land title. For example, we had a project which we worked together with the Ministry of Local Government on, which had a mobile unit that worked with the GAs and assistant GAs to try to put that documentation back together again, whether it be just simple identity cards, whether it be property deeds, and that was important. Community was also very important because I mean, these people had been in camps for sometimes up to 2 years, most times less, and they hadn't necessarily been with people from their village, and you had to get people working together again, and the social capital, and to rebuild the social capital after so many people were affected by fighting.
Okay, now that is just getting by. I mean, that's just to get by, right? I mean, the first step, get people back into their homes, have their tap water running, have the schools rebuilt, and so on. But, what about investments into these areas? Where is the sustainable employment going to come from? Are they all going to go back to, small sustainable agriculture type of livelihoods they had, in the past? Or is there a bigger, more complex, more comprehensive development plan? I'm asking you particularly because the UN is always talking about the Millennium Development Goals and reduction of poverty and pro-poor growth and all of that. So in that context, what does the future look like? And also, is there a democratic process that everybody can be sort of satisfied with, that makes sure that this development, the fruits of development, are essentially equitably divided among all the different communities in that area?
Yeah. Well, I think there is a development plan which the government has put together for the East, and what we do, we try to fit into that. But I think we feel at this stage our main comparative advantage is actually in these first steps of recovery, getting people back to a normal life. We work in partnership with the World Bank, we work in partnership with the Asia Development Bank, the Japanese, American government, many others also have other programs of assistance there, as well as, of course, the government's regular programs. And they tend to be focusing more on the larger infrastructure needs, which are some of the things that are needed for, I guess, bigger economic development that you're talking about. One of the things that's important in such an area is that the local government functions well. So we have a new project also that's working both to strengthen the provincial government as well as the district governments, and as a supplement to that to work with Pradeshi Sabhas, so that the whole structure of governance, right from the village up to the provincial level, and including the district, functions better. But you're right. If the East is going to take off, you have to have a certain environment in which investors are confident. We feel that it's important that if people have their normal life established, that's one of the most important ingredients in that confidence coming back. And it makes it more likely that there's also the political stability and the low level of risk which investors want. And there's some examples of investors actually going there and doing good things, but it's still fairly small.
Years gone by since democracy has been established with the establishment of the Provincial Council. But we don't see real investments going into these areas. There have been some discussion about certain people in